Hey there, welcome to the Gospel-Based Conversations podcast. I'm Dr. Chaz Rowland, and I'm joined here in studio with Ryan Miller, and we are here continuing our conversation from last week on anxiety, depression, stress, those kinds of things. And this whole conversation got started because we were talking about some people sent in some questions for us to have this conversation because they were concerned, quite frankly. They're concerned because they felt like they're not a very good Christian because they're dealing with stress and anxiety and depression. They feel like they're less than or not being faithful or obedient. They feel like, honestly, sometimes they feel like the only answer to their stress is that they're being told is, well, just pray more, pray harder. You just need to trust God more, and they feel like I'm trying. I'm doing everything I know to do, and I'm still dealing with this anxiety, and so they feel like something's wrong. Something is they're not a good Christian or other things like that. And so I wanted to deal with this over multiple episodes because I think it is such a common thing, because those people who reached out, and like I said, there were multiple people that reached out that wanted us to address this, are reaching out because I think they feel, one, that there's a guilt that is associated with it, that is inherent in feeling like you're stressed or have anxiety or feel depressed. And also feel like the people feel like they're alone and they can't talk about it with anybody. And so they wanted to hear people talk about it honestly on this podcast to help them flesh out in a safe place for them, how they should think about these things. And so what I wanted to throw to you, Ryan, here kind of to get the conversation going is the question of, let's define our terms a little bit. What is anxiety? What is stress? What is depression? Like when we use those words, is there a distinction between those things for you? How do we understand those things? If somebody says, I'm stressed. If somebody comes to you and says, I've got anxiety. If somebody comes to you and says, I'm depressed. What are you hearing in those terms?
Well, and that's a great question that I don't know that I can give a great answer to. We'll find out. I think that stress, we all have stress. Stress is a part of all of our lives. I don't necessarily think that means that everybody has anxiety to that extent, that stress doesn't always have to turn into anxiety.
So you see stress as different than anxiety? I would agree.
I think so.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think so. And I think that maybe this is where it'd be fun to have somebody that's got the schooling behind on this topic to know how they would address these things and label these terms. But yeah, in my mind, stress is, we all deal with stresses. Anxiety is when it starts to fester. It doesn't go away. It builds and it grows. And I think then, what was your other
depression?
Terms? Depression, yeah. I mean, depression is, it's not just being melancholy and having a bad day. That's when this anxiety and stress can snowball and turn into just a season of life, a longer period of time, in my mind.
Because depression is not sadness.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not something that just
flutters
in and goes away quickly.
By the way, just like joy is not happiness.
Right.
You can be happy and not joyful. You can be joyful and not happy. You can be depressed and not sad.
Yeah.
You can be sad and not depressed.
And I think part of an element, and again, like, this is where we probably need the label at the beginning of the podcast saying we are not licensed therapists, psychiatrists.
This is not
professional advice. But I think of that idea of depression also, I think, comes with an element of hopelessness.
Yes.
You know, when you distinguish that and sadness, that Christians can wrestle with stress and anxiety and sadness, but we shouldn't at any point become hopeless. And I think that's where one of maybe those warning lights that comes on in our lives, like a dashboard light letting you know to check the engine, is when the stress and anxiety we're feeling have us feeling hopeless.
Yeah.
That's when you know it now has crossed over and not just a healthy response, because it is a healthy response when you are struggling with a trauma in life or when something bad happens. You look at Paul writing in Philippian jail cell, like there's no reason to think Paul is saying this is the best vacation ever. I love it here. I hope I'm always in jail. Like, we would be horribly wrong to think that we just have to be completely naive and ignorant to the difficulties we're going through in life. We don't have to ignore those things.
Paul is not enjoying being in jail.
No.
Yeah.
But he's not hopeless. That's why he says, I will rejoice because of Christ.
Well, in that Philippians passage, when Paul's in jail, he says, do not be anxious about anything,
Right.
but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving in your heart, so that your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So he's in a jail cell. He's miserable. He has no comforts. He is in fear of his life.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just jail, hey, I'm getting out in 30 days. It's jail, I may die.
Right.
This could be death row for him. And he's talking about not being anxious about anything and being thankful. And so people read that and they go, okay, I'm not a good Christian because I'm not dealing with what Paul's dealing with. And I'm struggling to be thankful, and I'm struggling with anxiety. So how can he command me to not be anxious about anything when I'm struggling with my coworker at work and our relationship, is messed up, or my neighbor is not cutting his grass and it's making me go crazy, or and there's small things and that's getting under my nerves or onto my nerves or whatever, and I'm not able to shake it. Or then the serious stuff that we're not laughing about, but I still can't shake it. Like, how do I process that command? Don't be anxious for anything.
Well, so I think, first off, I don't think he's saying that in jest. I don't think he's saying that lightheartedly. I think we would be wrong to read that and go, oh, he doesn't really mean that.
Great point.
In other words, I don't think we can just throw that in the trash and say, no, that's not really what he meant. I think it is possible, I want to say. I'm saying that and I'm pausing because I'm like, I'm not there. But I know that the longer we walk with the Lord and the closer we walk with the Lord, in my own life, I've seen that as I've seen God's faithfulness. And I think Paul sees this. I think by the time he's in Philippians here, he's had the head knowledge as a Jewish Pharisee and expert in the law, right? But basically, you've got now, Paul has been walking with the Lord for a while. And I think that when we go through the hardships of life and we see God's faithfulness, and especially when he takes us through some of those traumatic moments that maybe rocked us earlier in life, but after you get through that hardship and see the goodness of the Lord to be faithful even in that hardship, I think it does make it easier to not be anxious in everything. And so I do think when he tells us that command in Philippians to not be anxious, but to go to God with thanksgiving in all of our prayers, I do think it's possible. I just think sometimes it's something God grows us towards as we are going through sanctification and being made more Christ-like.
I think there's a key also in that passage where Paul says that the peace of God will guard you, and he calls the peace of God a peace that passes all understanding.
Yeah.
That phrase, no one should miss the power of that phrase, because what he's saying is this kind of peace doesn't make sense, which hopefully should help and encourage you, because it's not that he's saying,
just be rational and you'll figure this out.
No, it's irrational to have peace.
It's God's grace.
Yes. And so that's where it's like, hey, you're normal if you feel a lack of peace. It's a spiritual work to have peace in this kind of stressful situation, because you shouldn't have peace. And the only way that you're going to have peace is by relying on Jesus. And that, again, though, even in that hope, that theological hope, is precisely where the stress comes in of the question, which is, okay, but I'm trying and I'm still struggling. So I want to go back to what is anxiety. Peter, in 1 Peter, is writing about anxiety, and he says to cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. And I think if we think of those three words that I used to kind of set up this conversation: stress, anxiety, depression, and if we think of them in terms of almost three levels, okay, on your best day, you're going to have stress. Like, you're at Disney World, the happiest place on earth, and you've got monumental stress, right? You could have stress because of money.
3 kids.
You could have stress because the kids are crying.
Yeah.
You can have stress because the line to ride, Tron is 2 hours long. I mean, you can have all kinds of stress and be in a great idealistic, setting. You can be at the beach and, the high tide is pushing up some jellyfish and that's stressful or whatever the case may be. So, the point is you're always going to have stress, even in the best of scenarios. But then there's anxiety. And anxiety implies, and the fact that it's a command, he never says don't have stress. But he does say, cast your anxieties on me. And I think that's the key to understanding what anxiety is theologically, the way the Bible uses the term. And this is why, I'm not asking from a psychological perspective. Yeah. I mean, biblically, what is anxiety? What is God commanding us to do? Casting our anxieties on him. In other words, you need to learn how to give me your stresses so that you don't hold on to them.
They become burdens.
Because then the anxiety becomes burdensome. And if the anxiety becomes a burden, then it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
And so what he's commanding is not a stress level. The stress level can be a 12 out of 10. Like Jesus in the garden. Stress level 12 out of 10. It's off the charts. He's so stressed, he's sweating drops of blood. Capillaries are bursting, and the blood is coming through his skin because he is so stressed. Needless to say, I would suggest I have never come close to having that much stress in my life as to what Jesus experienced there in the garden, physiologically, that was being expressed. So that he's not commanding don't have stress. What is he commanding? Cast the anxieties on him. What does that mean? It means, first of all, admit your stress level. It means acknowledge that you can't solve it, that it's beyond you. Admit that you need his help and that he's the only way that you're going to get through it. And trust that he will not ever leave you or forsake you, and that he will see you through it. And I think that's what it means to cast your anxieties on him, is knowing regardless of how bad this hurts, regardless of how uncomfortable this is, regardless of how miserable a situation this is, which is exactly what Jesus is going through in the garden. Bad, hurtful, miserable circumstance he's about to go through. But it's okay. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. That's him casting his anxieties on his Father. And he's saying, nevertheless, not my will be done. Not my will, but thine be done. He's saying, I trust you. That does not eliminate the stress.
Right.
And that's, I think, the key. Do not equate your emotions of feeling the weight of the stress to I'm being disobedient in my dealing with anxiety. Is that fair?
No,
Does that
think
make
so.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And I would say too that it's a great reminder of what you see Jesus doing, and Jesus in a lot of ways is doing the same thing we see David do in the Psalms, of admitting the pain and admitting the stress that's going on. You see, Psalm 13 is one of my favorites. Of David starts this psalm out just saying, how long, God, are you going to ignore me? How long are you going to hide your face from me? You're going to just continue to leave me alone to die in these caves? And then he turns his attention back to God and his goodness and faithfulness. Not my will be done, but your will be done, Jesus says. And so I think that's one of the keys, is to realize you're not weak in your faith because you're dealing with these stresses, but when you're in those moments dealing with the hardships and the things causing stress, acknowledge them for what they are, that they stink and they're horrible, but also then redirect your attention onto God and his goodness and faithfulness and his love for you, so that you're not just putting all of your attention constantly on the problem.
So I want to relate something here that I think is significant, because when we talk about this idea of dealing with stress, but not, let me back up. There is a point at which dealing with stress, the way you deal with stress or the lack of dealing with stress biblically, can become sinful, right? So, where you are blatantly disregarding the command to cast your cares on him, cast your anxieties on him. You're not doing it. You're not trusting.
And you're no longer characterized as a person of
faithfulness, but just of worryiness.
That's right.
Of being worried all
and
the
that's
time.
sinful.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to gloss over that. There is a spiritual obedience component to this, okay? And so there is a point at which you can be disobedient in that. But I also want to say that you can have those stress levels and be dealing with anxiety and not be sinful, right? There is a righteous anxiety and there's an unrighteous anxiety. And I think the thing that helped me understand the distinction between righteous and unrighteous anxiety is a couple of other things that are talked about in Scripture that is very similar. Anger is talked about in Scripture. Anger, is that a sin or is it not a sin?
No.
It's not a sin.
It can be healthy.
It can be healthy. That's right. God is angry.
As you talk about righteous and unrighteous stress, I think of healthy and unhealthy stress and anxiety.
So there's healthy stress, there's a unhealthy stress, right?
Yeah.
And it's all in how you deal with it. It's all in how you process that, right? The same is true of anger. Clearly, anger is not a sin. Lying is a sin. Anger is not a sin. And the reason we know anger is not a sin is because God is angry.
Yeah.
Right? He is an angry God against sin.
Right.
Because he's holy. And so that means he must be angry with sin. So there is a righteous anger. Also, we know it's not a sin is because God tells us in the Scriptures to be angry but sin not. So he tells us, in other words, there's a right way to be angry and a wrong way to be angry. And so the question is, what is the distinction between righteous anger and unrighteous anger? There's one other similar connection that I want to make, and that is in the area of mourning. We just had a funeral in our church the other day, and I was thinking about this as I was kind of in my mind preparing for this podcast. And we often will use this verse in funerals and in times of mourning when we've lost a loved one, where God tells us to mourn when we're mourning death, to mourn as those who have hope. In other words, what is he saying? Mourn like a Christian. Don't mourn like a non-Christian. Mourn as if you know what the future holds for a believer. And so what does that mean? It's going to be okay. So I can mourn, I can be sad in the moment, but I'm trusting God with the future, knowing that he's in control and that ultimately this is all going to work out for his glory and my good, no matter how painful it is. Mourning with hope does not mean you don't cry. It does not mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean that you won't cry every day for the rest of your life. It just means that in the midst of the tears, you have a hope and a trust of what God's going to ultimately do because of his promises. And I think the same is true of anger. We have an anger that is righteous, that is based in his word, that is based in his holiness, that is based in God's character, and yet we don't allow the anger to control us. We are continuing to exhibit faithfulness in spite of our anger, and that's how I would relate
stress and anxiety.
Stress and anxiety is exactly the same way.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
No, I think that's a really helpful way to phrase it and to kind of put it within that umbrella. That is the problem, I think, for so many of us. That's the problem for myself in my own life, is not that I just feel the stress, but that it becomes the burden. It becomes overwhelming, and it takes control. And when it takes control, my focus is completely off of God's faithfulness and goodness and his desire to overcome and to still be present, even if that means the bad diagnosis doesn't go away, that he's still good in the midst of it. And so I think that's actually really helpful in my own life. So I'll catch my check at the end for this session. But yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly.
So let me ask you another question. As someone who thinks of your own anxiety, your own stresses in life, are there things in your life that contribute to anxiety? And what are those things that can maybe be, I don't know that I'd call them pitfalls, but maybe...
Are you talking about personality traits that make
anxiety
worse?
No, not personalities. Just what are things in life that like when I'll give you an example. In my life, if I'm not getting good sleep, like when I think of times in my life when I've felt the most stressed, like in a day, when I am not handling things well, oftentimes it's because I have a problem where sometimes it's hard for me to go to sleep at night. And it might be 2, 3, 4 in the morning. I can't shut off my brain. Like my brain's just going. It's just I'm caught in a loop where I'm just thinking about things. I can't shut it off. I can't go to sleep. So I might get 2 hours of sleep, and it's time for the day. And that is a dangerous place to be, where there's something in my life that is causing. I wouldn't say the lack of sleep is directly the cause of the stress, but it makes me not handle the stress well.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think, and that's where every person is probably going to be different. I mean, there's probably some similarities with lack of sleep, or if physical health is struggling, those are going to be situations that make you probably more likely to struggle with the anxiety. I think for me, another one that's outside of those areas, it has to do with my busyness. And I noticed that I'm not even talking about sleep in bed, but just having some point for rest or leisure, or I've heard some people call it like your like self-help or self-therapy.
Recharge time.
Yeah, recharge time,
And people have different ways they get that recharge.
They do. And I think for me, that's sometimes I can see my anxiety levels getting more and more out of control if I'm staying super busy all the time, and it's go, 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 go. And I'm never having that time to really just sit down and go into idle and go into neutral and just recharge for a few. That in my own life personally factors in. But I think that's, again, where we're all different. And so everybody's wired differently, and there's triggers that might make one individual more anxious and more susceptible to anxiety, to make things feel like they're spinning out of control. It could be totally different for the next person.
Sometimes the way we help protect ourselves against dealing with stress in a bad way, or help ourselves deal with stress in a good way, can be healthy or not healthy. We got to be cognizant of that. So like I have a default unhealthy way that I deal with stress. I can be a stress eater.
Yeah.
I'm an emotional eater. And so there can be times when, if I just man, I feel miserable today. This was a bad day. Like I want to come home and I want to pound a stuffed crust pepperoni pizza, or take down the whole pint of Ben and Jerry's or whatever it is. And it's like, that just helps me feel better, and it helps me relax and recharge that way. My son, his recharge is he needs to be alone. Like we call it his hole. And he's just like, there's times where he's like, he has to be in his hole. He turns out lights. He has a weighted blanket.
Yeah.
He puts it over his head, and he just will sit in like darkness where there's just no anything, right? Yeah. And that helps him. And he will get stressed and deal with stress in a very bad way if he doesn't have his time in the hole every so often. He gets overstimulated and he just can't handle it. So there's healthy ways and unhealthy ways that we got to figure out that can be helpful, how to deal with that stuff. That's not even about the Bible. It's not just pray more, or it's finding the healthy ways to deal with stress.
I don't get it in every day, but it's why most days on my lunch break I go to the rock gym and get a run in. And it's not because necessarily I'm primarily trying to lose weight or stay healthy and active. There is a easy physiological observation I can make, and I can take my blood pressure. And if I stay on a consistent pattern of running 3, 4, 5 days a week, my blood pressure will stay low and stay great. And if I stop running, it's the stress level. Like I'm not burning off the stress, and that makes a huge difference in my life of staying active and going to the gym and getting a workout in. It actually helps me so much process that stress, and I see it with my blood pressure.
So the point is that we're wanting to make here is sometimes it's not simply a spiritual answer to help you deal with stuff.
Right.
There are just some practical life tools that have nothing to do with pray more or whatever. That's just about being a healthy person, that we understand here's ways that I can deal with my stress in a healthy way, and here's things where I'm tempted to deal with my stress in a way that's unhealthy, and I need to find healthy outlets to be able to do that. Because if we don't, then it compounds the problem.
And it will turn into anxiety.
Yeah.
And it will get out of control, and it will become a burden.
That's right. So I think in general that can be helpful to think in those terms, to understand that the spiritual help we're looking for is often much simpler than we are giving credit to on some of those levels. But I want us to go back to the scriptures for just a minute and consider how common of a problem this anxiety can be. You mentioned David earlier. Multiple times in this, I mean, goodness, probably I might be overstating, but it feels anecdotally like half the Psalms are like,
it's a lot of them,
David saying at some point in the Psalm, this stinks.
It's
like, this is bad stuff. And like in Psalm 42:11, David actually says his soul is cast down. Like, this is a Psalms are praises, right? And in the middle of this psalm, he's saying, my soul is cast down. So if you feel like your soul is cast down, that's nothing different than what David went through.
Yeah.
Elijah, who I would argue was the most powerful prophet that has ever existed on earth, certainly exhibited the most power in the Old Testament, mighty man of God. After the Mount Carmel victory in 1 Kings 19, asks for God to kill him. He is in such depression. Yeah. The most powerful prophet that has ever lived asks for God to kill him. That's at the point that he's at. So that would be close to what I would consider depression. Mm-hmm. That's beyond anxiety. That's getting close to something, very unhealthy when you're at that point. Famously, Job is in the situation that Job's in. He's lost his family, he's lost his wealth, he's lost his stuff, and he's constantly just in a state of borderline hopelessness and despair throughout the whole book. These are godly men. These are all godly men.
Yeah.
And they are expressing intense, beyond anxiety, what I would say is depression characteristics.
Yeah.
So the struggle's real, and I would argue that all of them ultimately find the solution in the same place, which is they're reminded of God's faithfulness. Mm-hmm. How can we be encouraged if we're struggling to see God's faithfulness?
No, I think that's a great question. And that's where I love the Psalms. I love the fact that David is so emo, right? Like this is your seventh grade boy that the girl has just broken up with and life is over. That's David in half of Psalms. And it's so encouraging to me, number one, because I can relate to that so often, that little trials and little difficulties in my life, oftentimes I turn them into just this huge event that is overwhelming to me. But all that to say, David gives us the perfect model, I think, of how to respond and how to get through this and how to wrestle through these moments. And he gives us the blueprint, which is essentially, number one, be honest with God. I think the same way that we try to not show our church families how vulnerable we really are and how damaged and hurt we really are. We want to put on the best facade ever. We have turned prayer so often. I think of, I want to be careful. I think of growing up, I would hear certain individuals pray and I would be confused because I'm like, Daddy, he talks so funny when he prays.
Yes.
Because it's, and sometimes that's a reverent language that you're speaking because that's your prayer Bible language because you grew up reading King James Version, and that's fine. But what I'm getting at is that we need to understand it's okay to just be transparent and be honest and be vulnerable and be us in our prayer life with God. That one of the most damaging things we could do as a believer is to approach God and with a facade on, with pretending to be something we're not. And
you're not hiding anything from him.
He knows.
He knows. You might as well be real and honest.
And that's what I love about David and the prophets you mentioned. Elisha saying, God, I wish I was just dead right now. Like, to be honest and tell God how you feel. And sometimes that means blasting him. Sometimes that means indignantly yelling at God
respectfully, but honestly.
And I'm like, even respectfully I struggle with, because I'm like, that doesn't sound respectful. But what I'm getting at here is, and I'm not saying David wasn't being respectful, but what I'm trying to get at is that what's awesome is that if you do that to me,
If my kid screams at me, it's not going to go well.
Yeah.
God is not fickle like I am. And the wonderful news there is when we blast God like David is doing in Psalm 13, and blast is probably too strong of a word, but when we are crying out to God, frustrated with what seems to be our reality of how unfair he's being in that moment, God is not emotionally fragile. He can handle it. He's the perfect father. He continues to love us even through that. And that's what a real relationship is based on is transparency and honesty.
Well, you're talking about David and how he blasted God, right?
Yeah.
Well, David also says in Psalm 34 that he says, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted.
Mm-hmm.
I love that in this context and conversation because what David's saying is it's okay to be real with God because if you're expressing brokenness, he's near to the brokenhearted.
Yes.
In other words, your honesty towards God does not repel him.
Right.
It actually draws him
Yes.
closer. So if you're struggling right now with anxiety and you're going, I feel so far from God right now in my anxiety, the solution is not put on a brave face.
Mm-hmm.
The solution is be more honest.
Yes.
Get deeper in your agony.
Yes.
and take it to him because he can take it.
He can take it and he cares. And then I think David also provides the perfect model because none of these Psalms with David ever end with him just, God, how long are you going to hide your face? How long are you going to forget me? You don't care about me anymore. And then he writes, period, I'm done writing.
Yeah.
He then transitions into reminding himself of God's truth, that God, you have been faithful. You have been good to me, that you will preserve me, praise your name. So I think you see a model there of be honest with God, but it's also don't just dwell and focus on the hardship that's causing the anxiety. It's put your eyes on Jesus and his goodness and the cross and the gospel and speak those truths. And this is what Kathleen and I in our marriage, she frequently much more has to do this with me than I do her because of our struggles being different. And I'm the one that tends to struggle with anxiety in our family because I'm the type A guy. We talked about this last podcast.
Yep.
I'm the planner and the everything has to be in control. Kathleen, for 15 years almost of our marriage, will frequently, when I'm teetering on the edge of despair, will physically, verbally say to me, talk the gospel to yourself. Mm-hmm. Like, preach the gospel to yourself right now. And I think that's one of the best things we can do is when we are going through those hardships, it's to be honest with God, and it's also to verbally speak truth to ourselves and remind ourselves of what God's word says. And I think that's when I say take your focus off the problem and put it on God. It's really another way you can say that is just speak biblical truth. Because the reality you're going through in that moment. The whole biblical truth.
Yeah, don't cut it short.
Yes. Because the ultimate reality is like, no, God is still for you. He has plans for you. You don't know how this is going to end up. And even if it ends up with your death, and this is the worst case scenario, he's still going to receive glory for that. And it's going to be your gain. To live as Christ, right. To die as gain.
There's a whole book in the Bible, like we've talked a lot about the Psalms and David. There's a whole book in the Bible called Lamentations. Yeah. Like literally the name of the book is Crying. Mm-hmm. That's the name of the book, Crying. It is one lament after another, yep. Of just, oh, this stinks. This is horrible. This life is pointless. Like like all of these depressing things are being said. And in the middle of this book called Crying, Lamentations, it says, your mercies are new every morning. Mm-hmm. Great is your faithfulness. The book of Crying in the Bible centers on, but God's still faithful.
Yeah.
Like your mercies are new every morning. And what that means is tonight stinks. Tonight is dark. Tonight hurts. Tonight is miserable. But there's a dawn coming. Your mercies are going to be new in the morning. And I know that no matter how bad it hurts right now, because you are faithful. Like you always have been faithful, you always will be faithful. And so, this is something we've talked about also in the last podcast, and I want to center back on is dealing with anxiety, dealing with stress is not about pretending that you're not hurting. It's about embracing the hurt. It go to level 20 out of 10 if you have to in experiencing the hurt that is real. But remember there's a tomorrow. One of the things that I've learned is when I feel most anxious, when I feel most discouraged, when I feel most worn down, it is often because I'm caught in the immediate moment.
Yep.
I can't see beyond right now. I can't see beyond the immediate hurt that I'm feeling, the immediate pain. I can't see beyond it. What does it mean to cast your cares on Christ because he cares for you? What does it mean to hand over your problems to him, cast your anxieties on him? I think what it means is to remember, to force yourself to remember that there's more than today. This too shall pass. It really will. On the promise of God, whatever you're feeling today is not forever. Mm-hmm. Your forever is awesome.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt today.
Right.
It just means that your forever is awesome.
It puts it in perspective.
Yes. And is that not what we usually need most when we feel anxiety?
Yep.
We just need somebody to come along and remind us.
Yep.
That this is temporary, man. It's temporary. And it doesn't feel temporary. And it could be heavy. Death doesn't feel temporary.
Right.
But it is.
Yeah.
There's a resurrection coming. Mm-hmm. Forever is on the other side of death. So it's that's the worst thing that can happen is death. And it feels bad because it feels final. It feels forever.
And it's unnatural.
And it's right.
But there's still a greater picture there that, to your point, of this is just the first chapter of the whole story. That God has so much more.
So I just want to say as we wrap up with this, there is hope in Christ. Whatever you're feeling, struggling with. 2 Corinthians 4 verses 8 and 9 says, we are afflicted, but we are not crushed. We are afflicted, but we are not crushed. This will not kill me. It cannot destroy me. Mm-hmm. Because Jesus is sovereign and he has promised victory ultimately, even if it is death. He wins. He's defeated death in the grave.
Yeah.
So what can kill me can't kill me.
Yeah.
What can destroy me can't destroy me, because Jesus has beat all that. And so have an eternal perspective. And so when you struggle and you're going, but I just can't get over it. I can't get over it. Yeah, you're right. You can't. But his mercies are new every morning. Tomorrow's coming. And this is temporary. This too shall pass. All right. God bless you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Hopefully it's been encouraging to you. I want to encourage you, just in closing, to do a couple things. Since we're talking about these kinds of heavy matters, if you need help, reach out to somebody. If you need to talk to somebody. Don't go through things alone. Oftentimes isolation is your worst enemy in whatever it is that you're facing, and so make sure you reach out to somebody. And my second piece of advice is reach out to somebody who loves Jesus. Reach out to somebody who has a biblical worldview, because what you need is not just someone, you need somebody that can help point you to Jesus, because oftentimes what we need is that eternal perspective, and we just need somebody to remind us of that. And so you are loved, you are cared for, and it's not that you're loved by me or by Ryan. It's that you're loved by a God who created you and created you just the way you are, and he loves you because you're created in his image, and he has great things in store for you and purposed for you as a child of God if you've repented of your sins and trusted in him. And there is an eternity of good and wonder that is awaiting you, and I promise on the authority of God, this too shall pass, whatever it is you're going through. But if you're struggling, reach out. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to not be okay. That's what it is to do this thing called life. And there is always a solution that is found in Jesus Christ if you will look to him. He is the author and perfecter of our faith, and he has not saved us to leave us alone. So God bless you. Thank you for joining us this week for our Gospel-Based Conversations podcast. Hope to see you next time. Please take time to subscribe. Look forward to seeing you next week. God bless. Bye.